But actually, let's start just with a couple minutes. We usually start with just a little bit of meditation. And actually, let's start with a little bit of meditation on, the four foundations or four foundations of mindfulness or whatever. But let's just do a few minutes of mindfulness of feeling. As I said last class, right? So a feeling is a omnipresent mental factor in Buddhist psychology. So it's one of the five aggregates, so it's always present. So, to do this, we have to bring our attention not, we can't be focusing on our thoughts. And instead, start to notice in each moment, so like, what's my feeling tone? Is it pleasant? Is there a sense of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? Mhm. And as you kind of slow down and try to explore this question, right, what you'll notice, you may like ordinarily we say, "Oh, I'm having a good day" or something, a bad day, whatever. But here, if you're actually being mindful of feeling, you'll notice it's momentary. In one moment, it may be in relation to sound. In another, something tactile or physical sense in your, whether it's in your knee or in your hand or somewhere else in your body if you have tension or relaxation. It may be visual. So and then also thoughts. Right? So each thought or sensory experience brings with it a certain feeling tone. So each time you have any kind of thought arise, don't focus on the thought, but focus on what's the feeling tone in relation to that thought. Notice it. Is it pleasant? Is it unpleasant? Or is it neutral? And each time you have any kind of sensory experience, same thing, right? Don't focus on the content of the sensory experience, but notice, is the feeling tone pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? You may notice as you do this that some uh, pleasant or unpleasant feelings last for just an instant, whereas others is a continuum over moments for some length of time before another feeling tone arises in relation to another thought or sensation, or sensory experience. Again, none of that's good or bad. Just keep noticing. What's the feeling tone now? Hmm. So for a few more minutes, we'll keep going, meditating like this. Just remember, like, so when you have a pleasant feeling, then you just notice, oh, that's that's what pleasant feelings like. So you don't judge it. You're just noticing. Okay, and like notice, really pay attention to it. Same with a neutral one. Ah, that's what neutral feeling is like. It's one of the five aggregates, and I'm going to notice it. And the same with an unpleasant. Really just notice what's that like. Of course, sometimes the feeling, whether it's pleasure, unpleasant, or neutral, is subtle. Sometimes it's intense. And again, you just notice that. Mhm. So we've been paying attention, right, to feeling in the present moment. And I want to keep going with a contemplation now. So we're going to not just focus on the present moment, but I want to ask you, now that you've familiarized a little with feeling the present moment, that's one type of meditation. So now what I want to ask you to do is to bring to mind a time in the past when you felt, I was mentioning a minute ago, right? There are like mild or extreme versions of each of the feelings. I want to ask you to bring to mind for a moment, like some event or experience that evoked, say the strongest aversive or negative, unpleasant feeling you can remember in recent memory. And just go back over that event for a moment and remember, what was it like? How did I react? What happened? What was the feeling like? That very intense, unpleasant feeling, displeasure. And then how did I react to it? What happened in my mind? Not externally, what did I do, but what happened in my mind? Perhaps I found that unpleasant feeling that was in my mind, right? So, usually we focus on whatever the external event was, but here we're using the external event, right? But what we're focusing on is, okay, that event evoked an extremely unpleasant feeling in my mind. And most likely what you'll find is actually, right, without control, all kinds of events cascaded in your mind, from unpleasant feeling to aversion to then whatever emotional experiences happened. So we're exploring, we're just noticing, oh, that's how I react to feeling, right? It was a feeling. My mind gave, my mind experienced that unpleasant feeling. And then what happened in my mind? How did my mind react to that unpleasant feeling? Did I get angry or despairing or hopeless or terrified or, whatever it may be, right? Or agitated or whatever the feelings were, right? Or whatever rather the emotions were, the thoughts were in reaction to that feeling. Mm. And again, don't here the purpose is not to like it's not to be judgmental towards yourself, but just notice, oh, that's what it's like. That's what beings do in reaction to unpleasant feelings when we have samsaric aggregates. Mm. All of us being samsaric aggregates react to unpleasant feelings. And then for another moment, right, think about the most pleasant feeling you've had in recent memory. Bring to mind the event or the occurrence or the circumstance where it arose, but then focus on the feeling, right? Usually we focus on the external, but here focus on the feeling, right? There was a pleasant feeling that arose. And then how did I react? What happened? What was my, what did my mind do, in other words, in reaction to that feeling or in relation to that feeling? What did my mind do at the time? What did my mind do afterwards? What did that feeling lead to in my experience? So the Buddha taught, right, that contemplating the aggregate of feeling is a contemplation on the cause of samsara, right? The cause of we say suffering sometimes, but dukkha is a better word, right? Unsatisfactoriness. And part of what Buddha is saying is that all of us, it's not, all beings in samsara, humans, animals, doesn't matter, right? Other kinds of beings, that we don't have control of our own minds, actually, right? Mm. Without any choice, sometimes we react to the feelings that arise in our minds with ignorance, with craving, aversion, and then, it could be with all the other, right? Sometimes become angry or hateful, sometimes become uh, overwhelmed with craving, whatever, desire. So that the aggregate of feeling gives rise to attachment and aversion, and then those give rise to all the different. Then if we look out, this is part of the, now we're going to meditate a little on compassion for ourselves and others. That how I and others relate to the aggregate of feeling, it makes us all like puppets, controlled by how we react to feeling. And how we react to feeling gives rise, all of us, right? Human beings, in other words, particularly I'm focusing on now. Everything from very subtle suffering in our mind all the way up to the, sufferings of war, violence. They come from like not understanding feeling and how to react to it in a healthy way with wisdom. So as long as I'm controlled by, with out of control, I react to feelings. I can't help it. With these kind of aggregates. I do grasp, I do become attached, I do become averse, I do become agitated, upset, all the different emotions, whatever come in reaction to feeling. And so I and others suffer. Even pleasant feelings, right, can give rise to so much suffering, not because of the pleasant feeling, but because of how we react to it. Here, like the compassionate wish we generate for studying Dharma right now is, may I gain wisdom in understanding how my own and others' minds work, right? So if I could free myself from being like a slave to reactivity to feeling through wisdom, then I can liberate myself from suffering. If I do that, then I'm capable of helping liberate others from suffering and its causes. Because the causes are how we react to feelings. May I gain the wisdom that understands that there is no there is no inherently existent self that experiences feelings. Feelings themselves are not a self. They're not owned by a self. They simply arise due to causes and conditions. But when I grasp at them in relation to a misapprehended self, then I give rise to suffering for myself and all others when they relate to the aggregate of feeling through a misapprehended self, they give rise to suffering. So may I liberate myself from that process, which is renunciation or the mind to emerge, right? The mind wishing to emerge from such imprisonment. Then may I, having gained the key of how to get out of that prison, may I help others be liberated from that kind of prison in the mind. So with that kind of motivation in mind, I'll recite once the verse of refuge in bodhicitta. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, through the merits of generosity and the other perfections. May I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Good to see everybody. So you get a sense, right? That's just one. I mean, there are many, as I've been saying, there are many, many ways to meditate on the four foundations of mindfulness. So I was just giving an example of how one might contemplate and meditate on the uh, mindfulness of feeling there, right? Which had, and again, we're going through now the specific, right? There were general characteristics and then specific characteristics. So the specific characteristics of the aggregate of feeling, one is it's the nature of experiencing either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral in the present, in moment. And the other is that it's a contemplation on the cause of suffering. So we did that just now. So then the third of they call it here in this text, the close placement or foundation of mindfulness. Either is translations of the same idea, but so the next one is the specific characteristics of mind, right? And one point that I wanted to make is that one of the, I mean, of course we're going through, they relate to the Four Noble Truths, but also it's harder, right? Or it's easier to start with body, isn't it? If you want to start with practicing mindfulness, this is why in the U.S. and Europe, right, so much is taught of mindfulness of the breathing, for example, because well, it's easy to notice. It's a lot harder. It's harder. I remember once somebody asked me to go to like a psychology class and teach mindfulness. And I started with mindfulness of the body and breathing, and everybody they had students, of course, were familiar a little bit with that, and it was easy. And then I went too fast. I decided to try mindfulness of mind. I thought, well, these are psychology students. They should be able to do that. They're studying to get a degree in nature, mind, right? Studying the mind. But they were like, they couldn't, they had never, of course, I mean, it's normal, right? But they had never tried to be mindful of their own mind. So it's kind of funny. Have a career helping people with their mind, but you don't usually focus on your own mind. But we have to learn to do that if we're going to do mindfulness of mind. Um, so it's a more subtle object, is my point. And sorry, so and then so one specific characteristic of mind is, what is it? It's that which is clear and knowing, luminous. There's sometimes clear and knowing, or clear, luminous. So clear means in the sense that it doesn't have shape, it doesn't have color, right? Um, I just remember I was once with a geshe in this man's house, and the man said, "I think I saw emptiness." And the geshe said, "What was it like?" And he said, "It was yellow." And then the geshe said, "Lauren, what do you think of that?" I was like, "Oh, don't put me in that position. I don't want to have to be the one to say something." It was many, many years ago. But you know, emptiness doesn't have a color, and the mind doesn't have a color. Right? It doesn't have a shape, and it's aware, right? In the present, it's in the nature, it's in the entity or the nature of awareness in the present moment, right? Um, Now, just saying that doesn't mean we're aware from nature. Those are the words to describe it, but then you have to relate those to your experience. Um, And they mention aware, right? Because one point is like, empty space also has no shape or color, right? But it's not mind because it doesn't have the quality of awareness. Um, so that's that part. And then in terms of the specific characteristics, you also meditate on mind as momentary and impermanent, um, which relates to the third noble truth, the truth of cessation. And we'll get into this more in a minute, but in the commentaries, they say uh, if you don't do that, people, and this is actually quite true, that people will become afraid of liberation because they'll feel or think that they'll cease to exist if they achieve liberation. And that's normal, actually. It's a normal thing. But if you meditate on the nature of mind um, and its impermanence, it helps overcome that fear. And you recognize that. Actually, there's a famous point Nagarjuna made. He said, Nagarjuna, in one of his texts, I'm not going to remember the exact wording, but he basically said, you know, wisdom is an antidote to ignorance, right? The wisdom understanding the ultimate nature of things is an antidote to ignorance. And if you cultivate wisdom, it can serve as an antidote and eliminate ignorance. But that doesn't eliminate, it won't eliminate the mind, right? Because the mind is not ignorance. The mind is a clear awareness. And the Nagarjuna said, there is no um, antidote to the existence of mind. So mind is beginningless and endless and will never stop. It's an endless continuum, according to the Nagarjuna. So that frees you from when you come to understand that experientially, then it helps free you from the fear of. Uh, Actually, it frees you first from the fear that death will annihilate you, and then from the fear that cessation of suffering will annihilate you. It's funny, we can so identify with suffering, right? That we think, oh, if my suffering stops, I won't exist. Which is kind of funny, isn't it? We become so, actually it's true. Sometimes we become so identified with our mental afflictions that we think, oh, if I'm not angry, I won't be me, or if I'm not desirous, I won't be me. So meditating on the nature of mind is an antidote to all those wrong ideas. Um, and there are many, again, there are many, just like with the other contemplations, there are many different ways to be mindful, to practice mindfulness of mind. Um, and but actually, let's start with just a couple of minutes. It's it's an interesting point, actually, if you start to meditate on mind, right? And just to pause for a moment, right? So like the tricky part here is that we're usually aware of the objects of our awareness, right? But here, what you do actually is you're trying to become aware of awareness itself. Sometimes it helps like to notice the gaps between, you know, one thought and the next. But even when you're having a thought or a sensation, right? What's that? Notice the awareness itself that's being aware. So you don't focus on the content of thought or sensation here. You also don't focus on the feeling. You just focus on the bare awareness. It's like luminosity or like a mirror that reflects. And anything can arise within awareness, actually. Any imaginable object of knowledge can arise. And awareness, in that sense, awareness is like a mirror. It can reflect anything. It does reflect anything. Actually, like the mental objects of awareness, right? They are mental objects, their thoughts or images. Actually, they arise within the mind and pass away within the mind. Like clouds in the sky, like waves in the ocean. But there is this continuum of um, awareness which is formless, clear. And that continuum is a continuum, which means it's momentary. And each moment of awareness gives rise to another moment of awareness. And even when I say a moment, though, actually, it's a little deceptive, as if the moment is something discrete. We sometimes say, be in the present moment. But actually, if you search for a moment of awareness, what you find, right, is like by the time you're aware of the moment, it's already started to pass. The moment has parts, or like in other words, it's never stopping. There is no graspable present moment. It's a continuum or an ongoing flow through time. Actually, I want to pause the meditation there and ask you something. It's just everybody, you all meditate and so on, but you know, do you have some sense of that experience? It's an experience, right? Uh, Awareness itself, mind. You know, how are people able actually to, what's your relation? Actually, I don't know. I mean, if you've taken classes in Mahamudra or something that you're familiar with Dzogchen, then of course it's been suggested to you to meditate on nature of mind. But otherwise, if you haven't taken, actually, it's kind of funny. If you haven't, then nobody ever asked you to do that. Actually, it's a little strange, isn't it? I mean, your mind is the most um, important aspect of your being. But what's it like to try to be aware of your? I'm just going to ask you, so because then we're going to talk about mind. But my concern is if people don't know what that experience is, then it's hard to understand what we're talking about. Of course, like with the breath, it's quite easy, right? Everybody knows what breathing is. But are people able to kind of have some sense of what mind is experientially? Anybody have a comment? If you don't have comments, it's okay. I
Yeah,
just
I
want.
mean, if you're asking, I don't know if it's right. I took the Mahamudra class before. To me, when I focus on when we do a meditation like this, it feels like a large field of space behind all of my thoughts and feelings. And like, so we use the word mirror, and like things appear in it and disappear in it. But it feels like a big empty space behind my thoughts, and I try to focus on that. It almost feels physically like it's in my face, where it's probably supposed to be in my heart, but that's what it feels like.
Interesting. Yeah, other experience. I mean, that's just interesting, isn't it? To notice what's our experience, actually.
It's kind of nice.
Anyway, you get my point. We have to keep meditating on. I mean, to do this mindfulness, you have to keep. Thanks, Ryan, by the way. And so to do this practice of mindfulness of mind, you have to start by just spending time familiarizing with mind, right? Um, and then once you do that, there are many different contemplations you can do. And so uh, I'll just describe some of them. So one is this idea of impermanence of mind, right? That it changes instant by instant. And there are a number of things that does actually in the that they point out in the teachings. Um, One point that they emphasize, or that's emphasized then, is what you start to notice is that, like, in the Pramanavartika, Dharmakirti teaches about this. He says, you know, actually, it's kind of funny. Like people know, right? Like, anyways, you know from you. This is, I mean, again, I'm drawing parallels to the physical world because we're more familiar with that, especially in our culture, right? But like, in other words, even if you're not a gardener, you know that like tomato plants come from tomato seeds, right? Uh, and that apple trees come from apple seeds, and you can't plant an apple seed and get a tomato from it, right? That's not hard to figure out. What they're getting at is what's the cause of something, right? That things have causal relationships, and it's a continuum actually in those cases too, right? An apple tree produces apple seeds, and then if you plant an apple seed, you can get another apple tree, and now you'll get more seeds and so on, right? It's a continuum. And that's easy to see, right? And nobody gets confused, I don't think. People don't think, oh, I planted, zucchini, why didn't I get an apple tree? But what Dharmakirti points out is if you become familiar with the mind, what you start to notice is, oh, each moment of mind arises from a previous moment of mind. And whether I'm experiencing happiness or pain, whether I'm, you know, sleepy or awake, um, awareness serves as a substantial cause for our next moment of awareness. And that's how mind works, actually. Right? And it happens at day, it happens at night. And and this is part of what's being gotten at. So then this fear of annihilation that can come. And it's very common actually if you meditate on emptiness, right? There will likely come a point when you get scared. You feel like you're losing yourself. And if you meditate on this quality of mind, they say that that will help counteract that, because you'll recognize that destroying ignorance by understanding emptiness won't get rid of your mind, because it's the nature of mind to continue on. So mind won't be destroyed. This one point.
Hey, Lauren.
Yeah.
No, I was gonna say earlier, 'cause sometimes like have experiences when I'm trying to be mindful of awareness, being aware of it. It feels unreal, like I'm not. I feel connected to something. I don't know. It's weird. It's difficult kind of to express, I always have a sense that it doesn't feel like it feels unreal. Like I'm not then like for example, then I get another experience and it's like, oh, I'm back to the world or something like that. I'm back into this. But that moment of mindfulness or awareness, it didn't it felt almost like it is not the real um I don't know, it's weird to explain, but yeah.
Isn't that interesting? That's really interesting, isn't it? Because like, one point I'll make, I just think it's fascinating what you said, because I think it's very common what you're describing, like as a common experience. And what I think is really interesting is, of course, like all the school, any school of Buddhism, actually they would say, I mean, of course, the mind only school, but even the other schools of Buddhism, actually everybody except the Prasagikas, I guess, would actually say it's more, the Prasagikas say it's equally real to the external world, but others would say it's more real, actually, right? So part of that, I think, is like we're conditioned, actually, to think of external events as real, right? Like that's our conditioning is like that. Um, and so I think actually it's very normal that you would feel that way, because our whole conditioning has been like that for this life. But actually all the Buddhist schools, right, they say everything arises from the mind, right? So it's very interesting. Like actually, Buddhism would say, all the Buddhist schools in they mean different things slightly by this, but they would say all the external events actually are arising dependent on the mind, or from the mind, you could say even, right? It exists on the tip of a wish, one sutra says, right? All of the whole planet exists on the tip of a wish. The whole universe exists on the tip of a wish, meaning from the mind, like they're getting at. So I think it's very normal that it seems like, oh, just focusing on awareness is not something real. That's what our culture actually says. It's what so it's normal to feel that way. But in some sense, actually, you could say in reality, it's the opposite, actually, so it's very strange, isn't it? And I'll make one more point. Like it seems really weird, isn't it? But like, I'm gonna give an example. I mean, I'm gonna give an example, right? Like the mind is just clear awareness, right? That's all it is, right? And I'm gonna give a very concrete example. Like it can see it if I say to even to myself, if I say, okay, so there's clear awareness, right? And then if I say, well, but then there's like and actually people will talk this way, won't they? They'll say, yeah, but wait a second, like there's an actual war going on in Ukraine, let's say, right? That's real, or is this is just mine, but then you have to stop and say, wait a second, right? Like somebody actually was telling me this. I was talking to somebody recently, and they said they knew a Ukrainian person who had grown up thinking, well, where's like who was talking about like the line where a country is, right? Like, of course, that was constructed by people's minds, right? And then the label Russia versus Ukraine or constructed in the mind. So actually, all those things exist dependent on the mind, right? Like, and then once those exist, then people invent a weapon and so on, and so on. It goes on from there, on and on and on, right? But And then actually, you know, there's that famous quote from Shanti Deva where he says, you know, an army even, right, or navy or air force is a collection of people, but they each have a mind, right? Otherwise they can't be, otherwise it would be a corpse. You can't have an air force or, you know, a military force of just corpses, so that they have mind. So that, you know, it all exists within the mind and from the mind, right? I'm just giving you an example, but we feel the opposite. I think it's very normal what Gabe said. We feel sometimes, oftentimes we'll feel the opposite. But if you stay with the mind a lot, and I was thinking this because like sometimes it can seem, you know, like the Dalai Lama often says, you know, peace begins with inner disarmament, create peace in your own mind. And, you know, at first glance, because of what Gabe was saying, I think if growing up, you know, in the culture I grew up in, when I first heard that, I thought, well, come on, that's just one person. That's not going to help, really. If I have peace of mind in myself, how's that going to change? And then, you know, what the Dalai Lama says, that's the only way it can change, because it's just a bunch of individual minds that are constructing, you know, a terrible, you know, we can make the external world a wonderful place or a terrible place, depending on our minds. So anyway, so my point is like, I think it's very normal to seem like, oh, well, you know, awareness is, or just this simple thing, right? Momentary awareness can seem unreal to us because we're so focused on the external. But that just means, I think actually that means one is like it benefits us to spend more time, which is hard to do. It's hard, or we don't often, maybe it's not hard to do. We don't often do it in our culture, but if we spend more time, then we start to see, oh, everything arises within the mind. The mind is paramount, actually. So actually, I think it's very normal to feel the way you feel. But then, you know, if we contemplate, if we actually experience first, it's two different things. One is noticing the experience of the mind in the present moment more times, but then actually thinking about it and going, wow, actually everything comes from that. You know, and then that becomes like our, you know, actually what we're trying to, because the mind is actually, you know, everything, all the paths in Buddhism also are mind, right? So actually the entire path to enlightenment is mind. Even our general, you know, we say the six perfections, right? Sometimes people get confused also with that. They think generosity is actually handing somebody something. But actually, that's just the external manifestation, right? Main practice of generosity is non-attachment and joy in giving, right? And then you express that through a physical behavior. But if it's not connected to the mind, like, you know, people give things all the time without any generosity in their heart, then that's not generosity, right? It's like, if I'm giving somebody something to get a good reputation, that's not generous, whatever, you know. Anyway, you see my point. So I just think it's very normal what Gabe said, that we feel that way is because we're conditioned to feel that way. But actually, Buddhism says it's the opposite. It's funny. Other comments? Oh, Lynn has. Yeah.
You know, I sort of always analogize this or think about it like music. And so when you play music or listen to it really intensely, you feel like you're on an edge. And then edge is really scary. And I sort of think of meditation in the same way. When you get to that edge, when you're totally present, it can be sort of rich, but it's also a little scary. That's how I look at it. And I once asked this young jazz pianist who was playing with much more famous jazz vocalists, and I said, "Aren't you scared when you play?" And he said, "I'm terrified all the time." So I thought that was really good. He was a good pianist, really good pianist. I don't know what's happened to him, but he was like, "I'm terrified all the time."
Wow.
So that's the way I think about it. Like if you can get to that edge, and yeah.
Yeah. Well, part of I think what you're getting at, Lynn, too, which I think is really, tell me if I'm getting it. I mean, one is I think I get what you mean, and also that it's implying something, right? Which is that, like, I think is important, which is that, like jazz or music or like that, uh, a genuine practice of meditation. Actually, two things. One is it's very alive, it's powerful, you know, and it's, what's the word? Scary, maybe is a good word, but it's alive. It's like it's transformative. That's the word I'm looking for. That it's, you know, it's, and the effects are huge actually, right? Like,
Yeah.
which is interesting. I think that's something that people don't realize that, right? Or don't think that way, that like meditating alone in your room or somewhere or under a tree or wherever you are is, if you're really meditating, it's actually an act of amazing power. Which is not how people usually think of it. So scary, I think, makes sense in a way. It's a famous quote from Miller Aper where he said, I went away to the wilderness or whatever to meditate because I was terrified. And then he said, now I've come back free from fear. You know, because he had realized the ultimate nature of his own mind. So then he said that once he realized that and became enlightened, then he felt free from fear. So then he traveled around spontaneously speaking poetry to people, you know, as he met them, enlightened poetry to whoever he met. Yeah. Okay, so keep going. So a few points. So then, so in terms of this mindfulness of mind, you know, so you become aware of the experience. Um, you know, then you become also aware of its impermanence, moment to moment, how it's a causal continuum that continues on. And another point that is in the commentaries is when you meditate on this clear knowing nature of mind. One point is the clear knowing nature of mind is not the ultimate nature of mind. That's the conventional nature of mind. Okay, so it's not emptiness yet. But one thing you start to experience actually, if you meditate on mindfulness of mind, is that actually not just the mental afflictions, but all the mental factors. Like in other words, that like whether you say joy or sorrow, whether you say hatred or love, that those all can arise within the mind, right? Like the mirror, you know, that reflects anything. But none of those are always present. So none of those are intrinsic to mind. Mind is just clear and knowing. And you know, and the one proof that is, if you get overwhelmed with anger, you don't have any love in that moment. You're not, you know, if you get really overwhelmed, right, you're feeling extremely angry at somebody, you watch your own mind, there's no love in that moment at all. Right? And then if you become overwhelmed with love, there's no hatred in your mind at all. They're antidotes. They're minds that can't coexist at the same moment. Actually, hatred and love don't coexist in the same moment, in the same mind. And so on, you know, and you start to notice, like, you know, you're usually caught up in craving. I've said this, then you notice there are moments where you have no craving, right? So you start to notice, in terms of the nature of mind, that none of those things are in the nature of your mind. And then you know, it says in the teachings this, but you start to experientially understand, not just intellectually, but experientially, that, oh, wow, those are separable from the mind. Those aren't in the nature. There's like clouds in the sky. You know, you know, one day the sky is clear, another, you know, and any given kind of cloud isn't always there. You know, one day there's rain clouds, another day there may be cumulus clouds, but nothing's permanent in the sky in terms of the clouds. Anyway, similarly, you start to notice experientially that all those kinds of particularly the mental afflictions are what we call adventitious, right? They arise due to causes and conditions, and they're not in the nature of mind. And in terms of the third noble truth, that gives you a kind of confidence experientially that liberation is possible. Does that make sense? So you start to recognize, wow, there's this mind, right, that exists, my mental continuum that's labeled mind, right? And all those different mental afflictions are not in the nature of that. So they're separable from that. And if I come to understand how to separate them or how to eliminate them from that mental continuum, then I can like clean it, right? Like a cloth that can be cleaned, you know. And once you understand that, then you understand something new about the nature of cessation. Does that make sense? And that's why this is, the meditation on the foundation of mind, foundation of mindfulness on mind helps you to understand the cessation, the third noble truth. And then, should I keep going? I'll say one more. I'll say one more point. Another point is, as you meditate on mindfulness of mind, one more meditation I'll share that Sonia Dalai Lama points out, is his then also, and people got it this last class, so it is important to say it. When you meditate on the body, right, and you come to understand that there is no self in the body, right, that is not so hard, right? If you go through your body, you'll have that experience, right, where you go, you look like, is the pus in my body me? No. Is the blood me? Well, I bled the other day that I wasn't like, part of me wasn't left on the whatever floor or something, and so on, right? And and all that, each part, you can go through the different parts, right? Is the muscle in my left arm me, and is the bone, is my elbow bone me? That becomes quite obvious, right? It's not hard to go through all of your anatomical parts of your body and recognize none of them are me. And if you do that, then what will happen inevitably is you'll feel, because you feel you exist intrinsically somewhere, right? So when you recognize the body is not me, you'll grasp at the mind, say the mind must be me, right? That's where the I exists. And so then you have to check, right? So you can't check that until you're familiar with the mind, right? So once you do mindfulness of mind, then you check, well, is this mental continuum me, right? And then you start to check, right, in that. And then there are different ways you can answer that question. But basically what you're asking then is, then mindfulness of mind can become a way of exploring the question, is there an intrinsically existent I or self in the mind? Right? And some Buddhist school, of course, in general, in Buddhism, we say there is no self-sufficient, substantially existent I. So some Buddhist schools say, though, that what do you say, the final illustration of the I, the thing that illustrates the I is the mind. Prasangika school of Madhyamaka says there is no final illustration of the I. You just label it on the body and the mind, on the aggregates. So they differ in that sense. Those different Buddhist schools have different positions on that point. But actually, I'll say from the Prasangika perspective for a second. The Prasangika school, of course, says, will say, that the mind, now we get to the emptiness of mind, right? That the mind itself, actually, like Khyentse Rinpoche once pointed out, there were two ways to do it. One is the mind is clear and knowing, he said, right? So then he said, you can check. So does mind itself exist as that which is clear or that which is knowing? He said that's one way of exploring it. And then you say, well, wait a second, if it's in the clarity, then it's not in the knowing. If it's in the knowing, it's not in the clarity, and so that's one way of getting at there is no intrinsically existent mind. Or the second way that's more commonly taught, often taught, is well, actually, you can't even find a moment of mind, right? If you start to check in your own experience, we started to do that a few minutes ago, right? Like if you actually check, mind is a continuum, right? And I often think that's funny. We say, be in the present moment. I was saying that earlier. But actually, so you check, we'll say, first of all, the past mind. Actually, past mind is gone, right? Like, so my mind of yesterday, right now, it doesn't even exist conventionally, right? It's not here, and you can't find it. A future mind, like my mind of 3 days from now, doesn't exist, right? Like, I don't know, so that doesn't exist at all yet. So you say all that's left is the present moment mind, right? But then try to find a present moment of mind, right? And actually what you find is like, if you actually check your own experience, of course, it's what's the word? Even like we say, even a moment, right, has a beginning, a middle, and an end. If you want to pick like a second, let's say 1 second, right? Within 1 second, you can say there's the nanosecond, that's the first nanosecond. So which one is the present moment of mind? Right. And then you have to recognize the mind is labeled on a continuum. Right. So then whatever mind you grasp at, that's the object of negation, right? We grasp at a mind that's a basis of an I. That doesn't exist at all. All that exists is a merely labeled mind. Right? But the actual intrinsically existent mind doesn't exist. So if that's where actually get out the exact quote. I like it. His Holiness the Dalai, I mentioned this once before, but His Holiness the Dalai Lama sometimes, so even though it's from a tantric text, I'll quote it because the Dalai Lama quotes it in general public. The Dalai Lama made this point. This is from a chakra samvara practice, but it says and Haruka is the name of chakra samvara, right? So it's a name. So he breaks down the language. So it says hey from the hey Haruka. So hey stands for the selflessness of mind, in which, though the mind is the source of everything, not an atom or moment of inherently existing cause can be found. Right. So just pause. I mean, this is what we're getting at. This is like mindfulness of mind. Now we're getting into a tantric level of meditation on it, but it's not unique to tantra at that point. Right. So first of all, I said in there, it says, though the mind is the source of everything. That's what I was pointing out to Gabe's question, right? The mind is the source. So this is the view of Buddhism in general, right? The mind is the source, actually, which actually it's the opposite of what sometimes people think, right? We think sometimes people think the opposite. But anyway, the mind is the source of everything, and yet the mind itself is selfless, without an atom of inherent, it's not, although it's the cause, it lacks even an atom or moment of being an inherently existing cause, right? Because of that momentariness, right? And then the momentariness, mind is merely labeled on a continuum, right? So it's empty of intrinsic reality. And as always points out, the next line in this is Ru, right? Hey, Ru, Ruka. Then Ru stands for the selves of the persons, which is found by abandoning a self that is caused by the network of wrong views that causes us to perceive an inherently existent self of persons. And what the Dalai Lama points out is he says, if you realize that the mind lacks any intrinsic reality, because it was easy to realize the body lacks it, right? Once you realize the mind also lacks even an atom or a moment of intrinsic reality, then any basis for an intrinsically existent self falls apart. And you can't grasp an inherent intrinsically existent self of persons. And he says, then you realize the Majjhamaka, the actual intent of the Majjhamaka in that way. He said, so realizing the nature of mind actually is the profound method, for realizing the Majjhamaka view, because there's no basis left to grasp at an inherently existent person. Because if you realize it doesn't exist on the body, and then you realize it doesn't exist on the mind, there's no basis left to even to try to grasp. And they, so it says like everything falls away to the expanse of emptiness in some sense, experientially. And one realizes the emptiness of mind and the emptiness of person, both in that way. So, that's part of the benefit of meditation. Something is getting at when someone's comments, he says, there are different levels, right? Just understanding the impermanence of mind is quite powerful. Understanding that the mental afflictions are not in the nature of mind is powerful. And then the final meditation on mindfulness of mind is this one on the ultimate nature of mind. And I'll make one other comment about that, just because I think it's useful or interesting, is the first Panchen Lama, Losang Choki Geltsen, in his famous text on Mahamudra, he teaches he says something important, so maybe I'll just share it here because we're talking about mindfulness of mind. He says, he was the teacher of the great fifth Dalai Lama. Actually, he was the teacher of the fourth Dalai Lama and the fifth Dalai Lama. Probably one of the most important yogis of the Tibetan history, really. He was actually also the teacher of the founder, the founder, Kalka Jetson. He was the teacher of the fifth Dalai Lama who founded the Ganden government. He was the first one to run, the first Dalai Lama to rule Tibet. And he was also the teacher of the first spiritual teacher to lead Mongolia, like Jetson Dampas. And he was the teacher of the spiritual leader of Bhutan also. So he was kind of the spiritual guide of all Central Asia. Amazing also yogi. But he said a few things. He said, meditation on the conventional nature of mind, its clarity and its knowing, its lack of form, its awareness. He said, some people mistake that for meditation on emptiness. That's not meditation on emptiness. And he says, but it's a profound method for generating calm abiding on a very subtle object, mind. Right? And so he says, and he says, actually, he makes a point. He says, sometimes people call that Mahamudra. And then he says, and that's good. It's like a good way to develop. And he says, but it's not actually Mahamudra. Mahamudra has to be meditation on emptiness. And he says, but it's very good to meditate on the conventional nature of mind, that which is clear and knowing, because you can develop a kind of calm abiding, shine, shamatha, on that object. And then he has this beautiful passage in his Mahamudra text where he says, then once you've gained calm abiding, so you can imagine the person has the ability to kind of stay focused on just the clarity and knowing of mind, which is space-like awareness, right? For as long as they want. He says, at that, first of all, that can seem like enlightenment or something, but it's not. He says, like a tranquil pond with a tiny fish, right? And the fish can move in this tranquil pond without disturbing the water at all. He says, like that, the yogi, in the tranquil space of meditating on the conventional nature of mind, the tiny fish of awareness turns and analyzes the emptiness of mind and realizes the mind lacks any intrinsic nature. Then he says, that's Mahamudra. When the mind realizes that the mind itself lacks any inherent existence, then that becomes the actual Mahamudra. So it's a beautiful passage in this text that gets at how you, and that's the final meditation on the nature of mind, is my point, right? The ultimate nature of mind, according to the Madhyamaka school's position. So anyway, there are a lot of ways to meditate on just the foundation of mindfulness of mind. But any questions about all that? Oh, Lisa, go ahead.
Sorry about that. I was trying to figure out I'm on a different computer. So I suddenly feel like I know absolutely nothing. I mean, I was feeling I was all along with you with all these teachings, and suddenly I feel like when you mentioned the war and the comparing conventional wisdom and inherent existence, and I suddenly feel like I absolutely know nothing. So would you please start over? No, I'm kidding.
Actually, what shifted? How did it shift? Describe, like, because you said you were following, and then what shifted it to feeling like you know nothing? That's interesting.
Well, because the war is so real in I'm all these demonstrations and rallies and groups, subversive groups I'm a member of and everything, and actions that I'm taking, and then it's I don't know, maybe my perception of reality just shifted backwards or something. I don't know, but suddenly I feel like I know absolutely nothing.
Actually, tell me if this is getting at it in a way. I'm not I'm not sure if I'm not sure I'm going to hit the right point. So let me say something back, and then tell me if this is getting at what you're getting at, or if it's something different. But I want to, like, point of say it the right way. Like, actually, like, you think of actually, I'll say it this way, like, use the example of a rally, right? That you were talking about, like a political rally or something, right? And, quite famously, right? Like, actually, Martin Luther King Jr. actually, was inspired, actually, his, it was interesting, that story where his mentor, Howard Thurman, who was a friend of his father's and became one of his mentors, went to meet with Gandhi, and then shared Gandhi's thoughts with his young friend, Martin Luther King Jr. And one point that Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. had said the same thing, actually, right? Which was, satyagraha, right? Was the idea of Gandhi's idea that you had to have love and also truth, right? For a movement to be effective, there had to be love and truth behind it. And then King used the same idea, right? He said love. He said, he particularly emphasized love, right? Love, the power of love in the march. And he said, don't march with us if you don't have love. And why did they say that? Like, in other words, actually, like, put yourself in Gandhi's position for a second, right? He was a not wealthy Indian man standing up to the most powerful at the time empire that existed on the planet, right? And you would think India has a lot of humans in it, right? A bit large population. You would think that Gandhi's position would be get the most people out possible, get as many bodies out there as you can get. But that wasn't his position. His position was, it's love that matters. You know, and King said the same thing. He told people, don't come, actually, right? He didn't want the most people, he wanted the most love in his rallies. So you use the example of rally, that's why I'm saying this. So their point was, if things are going to change for the better through the two of them had the same view in this sense, which was, if things are going to change for the better, it's not the number of people, although that helps, but it's the amount of love there. So they were arguing it is the mind, right? In other words, love doesn't exist in a t-shirt or a sign or a voice. I mean, a voice can express love, but love has to exist in the mind, and then the voice can give signs, a voice to it, a sign can express it, an action can express it. But love has to exist in the mind. So their argument was the mind is primary, right? So is that not so? But I'm not sure if I'm getting at the same thing you're getting at. That's why I wanted to ask that.
I think you are. I'm just trying to pull it all together because I know that I meditate on love like a lot. I mean, I absolutely 100% agree with that and go into all the meetings, all the rallies, everything with a heart full of love. And I mean, it's one of my things that I'm, always bringing up at the different meetings and stuff when people start, like hating or, you know, or, bad mouthing people and, people that don't agree with them and how wrong they are. And I'm always tried to, tell them that we need to embrace, and love. But I maybe I'm just having a hard time pulling those things together. Maybe my brain's just overloaded. I mean, I get it about, love is in the mind. I mean, it is, and I need to continue to control that because it's easy to, it was easy. It's not so hard anymore, but it was very easy to buy into the anger and stuff like that. But it's so non-productive. It's so not helpful. That's not the answer at all. Love is the only way through this. This is the only way. And it just needs to keep growing and growing and growing. But I guess it's the realities that I'm having a hard time pulling together. Maybe I'm just thinking too hard about it, but it's the realities of it that I'm having a hard time pulling together. Like the disappeareds. We went to a vigil last night, a candlelight vigil last night for the disappeareds, and they're suffering, and it really and it really hurts, So maybe I'm just confused and tired. I don't know, but it's just suddenly I just feel like I know nothing about anything except for that love is the one way through. And that's the one and only thing I think I know. Everything else is like, Does that make any sense?
Yeah. Yeah, it does. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm just reflecting on what you said. Oh, sorry, John has his hand up. I'll let John tell him.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Know, that's a very interesting perspective. That I think your name was Lisa, and the one thought that occurred to me is that genuine love often displays a wrathful aspect. Because highly realized teachers, for example, that's one of their qualities is that they display tough love. And I think in our current situation, I think to the best of our ability to control negative motivations and expressing that in our speech interactions, that we get a handle on that, but at the same time that we have to do things that are genuinely effective. And I think, in our current generation, of course, and maybe for many generations past as well, we are in unprecedented times when we have to do something genuinely effective. But at the same time, even though it may appear conventionally, to other people's minds to be anger, in fact, if we can cultivate that love and express it in a way that is genuinely forceful, with regard to the, what we're called to do in these kind of very challenging times, then that's what I think we have to do. We can't just, I think it can be genuinely labeled as love to do something that, as a last resort, stopping people who are doing so much harm.
Yeah, I think it's just important to stay on top of your motivations when you're doing that, because it's very, very hard to make sure that it's easy to say like I'm doing this out of love, but to inside yourself actually be motivated by intense anger. I get that every day. But that's why I think, yeah, these classes are, I mean, studying the Dharma is so valuable because you can learn to act forcefully in a way that isn't harmful to yourself or others.
I mean, it's a very challenging exercise in sublimating, because it's, we have to be very honest with ourselves about, what the motivation is. But it's, well, I mean, I don't want us to spin off into a political discussion, but we have to do something to stop it. We have to do something.
May I make a comment?
Of course.
This is in reference going back to what Gabriel was saying, Gabe, in terms of the unreality of what's going on around us. And, maybe studying emptiness doesn't have a direct correlation to what's going on politically. But I don't know, that's, like you said, probably another conversation. But the thing, I have a teacher currently who made this analogy to mind. When we're in a, and you've probably heard it before, but it really is helpful to my mind. You're in a movie theater and you're relating to what's happening on the screen. This is where the reality seems to be. But we have to look to the projector where these images are coming from. And the analogy is that the mind is the projector, and what's going on out here in the world is the projection. And so it doesn't do any good to react to their projections. It always comes back to the mind and what the mind is conjuring, the conjured illusions that stem from this mind, the projector. And if, what is it, like what Laura is saying to us, what is in your mind? What's, you can say, we might say that it's pure love and, go from there, and that's the best you can do. But other, like you, Ryan said, it could be pure hostility. You know, I used to go to demonstrations with my teacher, and if he saw anybody in the crowd in front of the Chinese embassy shouting, you know, angrily, he'd say, "Go home. We don't need you here." And so, you know, there is a level of unreality of these mass projections that are appearing to our minds right now. You know, and it always comes back to what's going on with the projector. And so that I was going to ask Lauren, is the quote that you made, is that Ka? Hey, Ru Ka, is that that's Ka? Yeah. You
Yeah,
know,
cause the dual, right? Yeah, non-dualistically experiencing that. Yeah, the subject and the object merging. That's what in that quote. It's cause this merging of the subject and object of emptiness. I mean, the
non-dual
subject
nature.
of mind and the object of emptiness merging is like water into water kind of experience is what they're getting at.
I would love to have a copy of that, or maybe you could put in the chat the source of the quote. We could find it ourselves, or send it to us or something. That was really quite wonderful.
I'll send the full quote from it's a verse from I think it's from the Chakrasambhara Tantra itself actually. It's a
I
verse, but the Dalai Lama was, I guess, since the Dalai Lama
Oh, no, not the Hey
that
Rukash,
experience.
not that,
Oh,
but
that-
the poem, or you know, the one of the reference to the fish turning and
Oh, that. Oh, I can send. Yeah, I can send the book. It's in a couple. There are a number of translations of that. You mean the one by the Panchen Lama?
yes,
Oh,
please, yeah.
the Mahamudra one. Yeah, I can send. There are a bunch of translations of that. It's a very famous teaching by the Panchen Lama that's been translated into English numerous times. So I can send a few references of books that have it.
Oh, that'd be
And
great.
there are some of them are probably online, but I think there's an online version. But I'll send a few references. Yeah, I can do that.
For me, the Hey Rukashri koan, it's like a koan, you know, it's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
you can refer to it on a daily basis, you know, to see, because it helps us to go back to where is this mind, or what is this mind? You know, so thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I really appreciate people like, what is your name? LR. It says your initials, out there waging battle every day, but not battle.
Lisa.
I'm Lisa.
Lisa, thank you.
So I mean, actually, you know, I don't really have any comment about the. I don't know, but I'll go back just to more the point from earlier that maybe relates. I think is that you know, when Buddhism says, especially, you know, the problem is it's not there's no Buddhism doesn't offer something obvious and quick, unfortunately. You know, because what Buddhism is saying actually is that everything, you know, that everything it's possible to change anything actually if actually if all the you know, if your own mind changes, it changes your experience of everything. If a whole bunch of people's minds change, it changes whatever they're sharing in common. You know, their shared karma, their shared experience. Of course, it's quite difficult, isn't it? Because it's actually very hard to change your own mind. And it's really, really hard to change others' minds is a problem. That's true, you know, and that's an issue. So I don't have a solution to that, but that's in a way a Buddhist perspective, isn't it? Is that and I'll just share something, a reflection. I often reflect on this myself, not before the current political events, but I reflect on like actually the largest like I often think back to the historically to the Mongolian Empire, which was the largest land empire in the history of the planet. Was the and I think of like, you know, the early part of the Mongolian growth of the empire. They were like, if you study it, right? I mean, they would actually there was a famous they would chop off the heads of their enemies and put them on pikes and put it outside the next village they were going to attack to say this is what's, you know, if you don't submit to our attack, you'll end up on the village after. You know, if you agree to our terms, we'll make, you know, you can become part of our empire, and if not, we'll destroy you and put your heads on the next village we get to, like we did to the last one. That was the early phase of under Genghis Khan's attacks. You know, so they were a very fierce, my point is, a very fierce warrior empire. And you know, if you study the history, it's interesting. Like Tibetans, you know, Tibetans weren't actually they entered Tibet, but they chose not to conquer Tibet. They sort of incorporated Tibet in some ways, but they liked Tibetan lamas, was the thing. But anyway, there are all these stories that are told, which are just strange, actually. Where, like, I always think it's funny, where like various lamas walked, you know, they were walking. They didn't have horses, the Tibetans at that time much. So they would walk and go meet the Khan and say, please practice compassion. You know, and somehow over like generations, they convinced the Mongolians to become a peaceful people. It took a number of generations, and one of the Dalai Lama, I think it was the fourth Dalai Lama, took rebirth as a Mongolian under the Khan. He was the Khan's child. You know, so they did some kind of process like that. So it's like, how did they somehow, you know, and you know, if you look at Mongolian culture now, it's different than Tibetan culture, but they practice Tibetan Buddhism. But I often just think I don't understand it actually, but I think, how did they do that actually? Like in that instance, there was an actual change of a culture over generations, but it's hard to understand how cultures change, you know. But my point is like they changed, you know, the culture changed people's minds, right? And then their hearts, and then the culture changed and they stopped doing some of the behavior they've been doing. But I don't understand how they did that, so it's hard to know how to do it now. Anyway, I guess we went over time. But I sent out the schedule, a couple points quickly. I sent out the schedule for May and June. So that should be up, I think. Jody is already up. I think it's already up, right, on the, yes, it's already up on the website.
It's on the website.
Great. So that's up already and people can see it there. So we've got the schedule through June. And then and I already said for people who are interested that you know, up in Connecticut, Jordan Rinpoche or Sharpa Choje Rinpoche, His Eminence Sharpa Choje Rinpoche in Nalong, Jordan, is teaching in the beginning of May, I guess, on Lama Tsongkhapa's Tendril Topa, the praise to dependent origination, and then giving initiations also, and so on. But that text, that praise to dependent origination, is a very nice text on emptiness by Lama Tsongkhapa that he wrote on the morning he realized emptiness directly. He wrote it after he had the experience. He wrote a praise to the Buddha for teaching dependent arising. It's a very beautiful text to study anyway. Anyway, so, but we should do the dedication. So, the supreme jewel bodhicitta, where it has not arisen, may it arise and grow. Where it has arisen, may it not decrease, but increase more and more. In this snowy mountain paradise, you, the source of good and happiness, all-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. I dedicate all these merits, which are merely labeled, totally empty from their own sides, to the I, who is merely labeled, totally empty from its own side, may achieve Buddha's enlightenment, which is merely labeled and totally empty from its own side, in order to lead all sentient beings, who are merely labeled, totally empty from their own side, to the state of enlightenment as quickly as possible. And you know, through these efforts together, may we all of us, be able to realize both the conventional and the ultimate nature of the mind, experientially, you know, and directly realize the ultimate nature of mind. And in that way, may we become, you know, fully enlightened Buddhas, in order to most effectively lead all others on the path of compassion and love to full enlightenment. Well, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
See ya.
Thanks, Lauren.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody.